Now, in order to get this discussion going a little bit, not to get you steamy, but I'm going to be a little bit taking a petrol side just to see what you're saying, because truth, we can go with the EVs for the personal consumption, and I'm actually looking at them myself at the moment. But these are my issues. The Chinese, I've got a friend of mine who bought an MG, and he's had a look, and there's definitely data going out of it a lot. So there's a concern. The Lexuses and the Toyotas and all that, I look at what the petrol car costs versus the EV, and I don't understand why I'm paying $20,000 extra. So I'm looking at all these EVs, and I haven't really found one where I kind of feel like I want to embrace them. So that's number one. But the second one is when it comes to the trucks and the farm machinery and all of that, yes, down the track there might be EV models coming, and there are already trucks on the road that are running EV. But I think I spoke to a guy who had a fleet, they had 53 trucks. I mean, it's when there's literally possibly hundreds of thousands in Australia. So can we really do right now still without the diesel, without the petrol?
Well, I went very deep into the EV industry in China, myself, to really see what's happening. And the truth is, China owns the global automotive industry. It's just that the rest of the world don't know it yet. Like just the range of vehicles, the quality of vehicles, the innovation, is really unbelievably good. The value for money. So now in China, you can buy a really great solid electric vehicle for about $10,000 US. I work with people like CATL, the big battery manufacturer, who do the base. So all the battery and all the drivetrain is in the base. They sell that, and then you can build whatever car you want on top of it. It's called the skateboard and the top hat, right? The rest of the car's the top hat. So that skateboard component, which is up to 1,000 kilometres of range on a single charge, fast charge batteries, EV motor, suspension, steering wheel, they can produce and provide to the industry for about $10,000 a pop. So the whole world is changing dramatically. These cars are better, they're easier to maintain, they're much cheaper to run, and in terms of the comfort and innovation, it's extraordinary. The automotive industry has just rested on its laurels. It's basically done no innovation for about the last 40 years. So the business model is produce a pretty poor efficiency motor and try and sweat that factory for as long as possible. That's what the Europeans have done. That's what the Japanese have done. And so this step change in innovation is super exciting. I can tell you in China, it's not just the electrification of personal cars, it's the whole transportation fleet. Buses, trucks, light commercial, all the way down to two-wheelers and three-wheelers. So the technology exists. In Australia, we've got to do a couple of things. We've got to make the charging infrastructure better. If you don't have the charging infrastructure, you can't have the truck fleet. And that's where we need to invest. So,
But also, I mean, we do have all these trucks that is possibly billions of dollars of infrastructure, and you can't really retrofit them. So don't they kind of need kind of a natural grow out? But there has to be maybe somebody has to say one day, from now on, you only can buy electric trucks. I don't know if that's the way to start that transition, but otherwise, people just sit there in what they're used to. I mean, and talk about the European innovation on the cars. I mean, you're not 100% correct there, because I used to have a tape deck, and then it was a CD player, and now I can stream in my car. They were the innovations on the European cars.
yeah, indeed, that's right. Yeah.
Over 20 years.
Yeah.
But seriously, I went to Germany. And normally you go back to Germany. I go every 2 years visit my family, and there's just a general slight happiness, but goes close over to arrogance in the Germans in terms of their position in Europe. Was very different this time. It's like somebody left the air out of their tires. I took a German train, and 2 of them got cancelled, and I rang the guy that I was waiting for, and I said, sorry mate, I'll be an hour late. The 2 trains that get cancelled. He said, welcome to Germany. 2026.
Yeah, right.
So the self-image is because the car industry was so much part of the German identity.
Yeah.
And it's in Germany they're still not driving the EVs, but the exports not going out in the numbers they did, and I don't think they have an answer.
You talk about the innovation. We've got a great company, Daniel Bleakley, who you'd know, has got a startup electric trucking company, for example. They'll succeed because they smash the economics of the thing. And you're right, all the trucks are going to change tomorrow. But the fleet is constantly being refreshed. So as they bring trucks on, if we can get the charging infrastructure, I was with a company, Illumina, yesterday. They do off-grid and weak-grid fast charging for heavy vehicle transport, so they can do up to a megawatt capacity, two chargers into a truck at the same time. If we get the charging infrastructure in place, then that unlocks the opportunity. But those that want to stay wedded to their fossil fuels, well, that's great. They become the Kodak of the future, right? So economics doesn't stand still. Those that respond to it and adapt are the winners, and that's the system we live in.
Yeah, but I mean, what does this crisis right now does? I mean, I had again a theory in one of my videos that it wasn't all about Iran. This is actually looking, where does China get its oil from? Happened to be a bit of Venezuela, happened to be before Russia, and happened to be Iran. I mean, these are the main three sources. Is this whole politics stuff just coincidence, or is there a plan?
Well, I know someone who does have a plan, and that's China.
Right.
Because they think in a 50-year time cycle, and they're not subject to a 3-year election process, right? So that just disrupts everything. China strategically has positioned their economy, so they're the big winners from the transition in terms of solar, inverters, batteries, EVs, the whole ecosystem. But they also think ahead, so they've stockpiled a whole bunch of fossil fuels, of critical minerals, a whole bunch of other elements. So I think that it actually shows that you do need national resilience, you do need a national plan. I think a national framework where we say our strategic reserve is 32 days, and we will house it in the United States,
of course,
is an abrogation of responsibility of successive Australian governments, right? We need to do better than that. But the great thing about our sector is we are the solution to this. We are what powers, that in a sense, it's kind of like the US prepper mentality a bit, right? That actually my home is my castle and you can't get me if actually I control my energy and I control my transportation. I'm going to control everything, but that's a big part of it. That's not a bad thing. I think people thinking about that in these times are probably thinking in a smart way. I think there are people that have been driving EVs that were like, kind of there's a peer pressure thing. Does everyone kind of get this? And today, they're the smartest people on the road.
Yeah, there's somebody coming past later in a half an hour, and they're giving us some stickers which says succulent, I can't pronounce the word, succulent Chinese wheels, which is from that meme where the guy got arrested for, in his protesting because he was trying to have a succulent Chinese meal. I don't know if you ever seen that little clip. And now somebody's turned it in succulent Chinese wheels. So they're actually leaning into that technology. They're becoming proud of it.
Totally. And why wouldn't you be proud of it? And that's why Australia needs to we're a middle power. We need to choose the best of everything. We need to create our path, which is uniquely Australian, in our national interest. That should be the job of our governments.
But I mean, I saw a couple of years ago a really funny clip which was all about those 300 billion of submarines that we're buying to protect our coast, to keep the trade routes open. And the biggest threat at the time was, it kind of was a comedy sketch, it was China.
That's right. So who you're protecting from, your biggest trading partner, right? It's going to be like, that's right, exactly.
So you kind of, China is, they're now dominating. I can see Fronius struggling in Australia. SMA just decided to go out. I mean, these are all brands which are European brands and stalwarts in the past.
Totally. Go back 5-10 years and that was the industry.
I know somebody who put a tattoo of a Fronius on their thigh. Mm-hmm. Well known in the industry. I mean, that's how much it got embraced. Yeah. So my point is, if somebody dominates it so smartly now, I mean, I go through Bunnings, and you know what I think happened? Somebody with a notebook from China came and went through Bunnings and made a note of everything that we need to build our homes and our castles, and then went back and goes, we need to build all these stuff at half the price, and then we own the market. I mean, that's what seemed to have happened. Yeah. So if somebody has that kind of really strong dominance, do they then one day maybe exploit that and really screw us over it?
I think we should be clear-eyed. We should be clear-eyed in all of our relationships. So, I'm not someone who's a cheerleader that says, it's one side or the other side. As I said before, we need to take an Australian first approach, a Team Australia approach.
Right.
But if we're smart about this, we can chart a course that actually gets the benefit of really all sides. Okay. And as a middle power, that's what Australia should be doing.
I'll probably say something a little bit controversial here now, but I've always grew up in democracy, and in the schools we learned all about what happened in the Third Reich in Germany. You really learned that. You had to study Hitler's speeches and how the manipulation was going into it and all of that. So you got a really antenna on there. A lot of the Germans still now in school really taught a lot. But I'm completely baffled of what's happening right now, because there's America bombing another country, taking out their leaders, and even if we don't like them, there are other leaders in the world in other countries that probably shouldn't like either, but they're actually our allies. So the logic of what's happening right now and the way we're justifying it, when you take normally the stuff that we teach the kids, do the right thing, be honest, don't manipulate, don't bully, shouldn't Australia maybe say, hang on, we don't really want this war? And if Canada does it, if Australia does it, if Spain does it, maybe at the end somebody realises this is not a good idea.
And I see there's pushback from a whole bunch of those middle powers. The UK is pushing back. Europe's absolutely pushing back. When
Yeah, but I mean the media on the front, maybe under the table in the diplomatic circles, they're all going, mate, not a good idea, find a way out. My stock market's gone down 15%. My petrol's gone up. My inflation's gone up. I'm not going to get re-elected. Please do whatever you can do. I think that's happened under the table, but the media itself is not condemning it.
So look, I think Australia's been complacent, right? Our cunning plan has been integrate ourselves so tightly into the US military, intelligence, diplomatic
If they don't
world,
give us the update on the submarine, the new software,
it stops working.
It's going
right?
to sink.
And so that's actually created a degree of complacency in our foreign policy positioning. The truth is, we are well liked and well respected around the world. We are a standout democracy. People love Australia. People want to come to this country from all over the world. We should be leveraging off those great relationships. The fact that we do believe in a fair go, that we do believe in a democratic approach, that we are open to cultures from all around the world. We're a very accepting, inclusive community and people. And if we leverage off that, now the problem has been, it's been easy for us to ride on the coattails of just, at the end of the day, you're not going to do anything against this because we've got our big brother here. Now, if that's is going to create a more nuanced, a more sophisticated, a more intelligent foreign policy positioning, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think we need to regain more control. We need to chart our own course. Of course, we have strategic alliances which are important to us, and I'm not saying that we should trash those, but we shouldn't just be blind. And I think in the past Australia has been blind. We've been in.
We've been following every damn war that was around
at any cost. And I tell you what, that Iraq debacle. You could have seen that coming, and the fact that we were all in.
Afghanistan wasn't much better.
I mean, Afghanistan's hard, right? Because Afghanistan was actually the source of the problem in the first place. So there's probably a much better argument for kind of an intervention. But the truth is,
but then we left it.
That's right. And the notion that you can impose your will on another country, right? You can invade it and control it, and then impose your will is a fantasy. People take their own actions, and so military power has limited impact. Wouldn't it be better if we actually make friends, have common interests, actually create a win-win situation and partnerships?
Please support the channel by liking the video, hit that subscribe button, and ring the bell, and check out all our other videos. Want more energy answered? Visit yourenergyanswers.com for quality energy products, tools and calculators, and find your quality local installers. You're still here? I'll see you next time. Bye.